Hi, I'm Tom, and you are tuned in to Hit the North, a podcast where I talk to a range of special guests, sharing their thoughts and feelings about the North, defined inclusively. Born in the north of England in 1953, John Howard is one of the great unheralded singer-songwriters who for over 50 years has deftly moved between Bowie-adjacent glam rock, Elton John or Duncan Browne-esque singer-songwriter territory, and disco and electro-pop. Yet, John Howard's music has always been unique, sophisticated, camp, heart-rending words and chords, the joy and melancholy in dialogue, always. Poetic phrases like the aftermath of fun, dead bottles of wine, disaster sublime, eye pencil smiles, dry ice for breath. Delightful odes to glamorous hedonism, like maybe someday in Miami. Casting shadows, an atmospheric curio which opened and closed the Peter Fonda film Open Season. John's done so much that is frankly great music. It's embarrassing for the collective British public taste that he is largely unknown on these shores. Become acquainted.
Take it slow, because baby, we got a long way to go. The road is full of stones, so kick them out of your way, and we'll be there.
Hello.
Hello,
Finally. How are you doing? All right.
Yeah, very good. Got a dog barking just behind us.
We have three, so don't worry. They'll be barking too soon. Have you just got the one, have you?
Yeah, we've just got one Cocker Spaniel.
Okay. Right. We have a Podenco, which is like a Spanish hound, and two Spanish terriers. And they love barking, all of them.
Just like Jester then, our one, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's good to speak because I've listened to your music so much since Kid in a Big World was reissued. And
okay.
Uncut magazine review, I remember.
Oh, that's right. That was 2004.
Yeah.
2004, yeah.
And then I was listening to all the new ones after that as well. And I'm a big fan of your music. I think it's great.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And part of the idea of this podcast is to get people's names out there who people don't know about necessarily and should know about. So yeah, it's
sure.
You were one of the first people I thought of. Anyways, have you lived more than 5 years of your life in the north?
Yep, I have. I lived in the north of England, Lancashire, until I was 20. So that would have been 53 to 73.
And where else have you sort of lived since, all the different places?
Well, in 73, I moved to London to seek fame and fortune. And then lived there from 73 till the late 80s, when my husband and I moved to Oxfordshire, a little village called Wantage, my little market town. And we stayed around Oxfordshire. We moved to another little village quite nearby, which was nearer to where I was working at the time. I was working at Carlton Records at the time. So we moved near Tame in 95. And then in 2001 to Pembrokeshire, because I left the music business in 2000. Having worked in it since the early 80s. So we bought a house in Pembrokeshire. It was a big house, but the reason it was a big house was Neil's mum and dad were going to come and live with us in the house. But sadly, his father died within a few months of us moving in, and his mother died a couple of years later. So we were like rattling around in this huge house. So we decided to move here, move to Spain. We moved to Spain in 2007. And we've been here ever since. We're now, since 2000, 15, we've lived in a little small Spanish village, which is great.
And what was the moment in your life that you knew you loved music and also wanted to be a musician?
I think probably the first inspirational thing that happened was my dad. He was a jazz pianist, my dad, and he played in a lot of bands, a lot of jazz groups from the age of 14, right the way through till he was in his 80s. He played in all these different jazz bands. And young child, I remember him rehearsing numbers for the gigs he was doing. First of all, I loved the sound of the piano and his playing. And I suppose that got me interested in wanting to be a pianist myself. Fascinated me watching both his hands, making these incredible sounds with these chords. Yeah. And then he started bringing home albums that he wanted to learn songs from for his gigs. So he brought home things like My Fair Lady, which had amazing lyrics on it, internal rhymes and all that stuff, which even as a young kid, 5, 6, 7, I was really intrigued by. And also he was a big Dave Brubeck fan.
Yeah.
And that got me really interested in different chords and weird sort of chord structures and a lot of major sevenths, which I still use. So I suppose that was the beginning, really. So from about the age of 5 or 6, first of all, I wanted to learn to play the piano. Then gradually, by the time I was in my teens, I knew I wanted to be a musician myself, a proper professional musician.
How did being Northern shape your place within the industry, and how did that compare with being gay, would you say?
Oh, that's interesting. I don't think being Northern really shaped my place within the industry, because when I went to London in 73, and I got signed up quite quickly to a management contract, guy who was the head of pop music at Chapel. And so he was my manager and publisher. And then about 5 months later, I got signed up by CBS. And I don't remember, quite honestly, I don't remember me being from the North ever sort of being an issue or even a conversational thing, Maybe when I was talking to my manager and his wife, obviously we brought it up. But I don't think it shaped me with the industry, because I'm one of these people who never feels they come from anywhere, really. I've always just been from where I live at the time. So yeah, I'm not saying I don't feel Spanish, but I've never felt localized by a place particularly. And being gay, that never really came into it at all either. By the time I got to London, certainly, and in the industry, it was never a complete issue. Being gay only affected me, although I didn't know it at the time, when the first single came out and Radio 1 panel refused to play it. And then the second single, Family Man, came out and they refused to play that. And I was never quite sure why they kept turning things down, which obviously affected my career a lot at the time, because Radio 1 was, the be-all and end-all. You had Radio Luxembourg at the time, but Radio 1 was it for getting, your name out there and your music listened to. It was only many years later when my producer at the time, Paul Phillips from the 70s, told me that it was all to do with the guy who ran the playlist committee at Radio 1, and he was a complete homophobe. And I had no idea at the time that was an issue. And when I discovered it, it was a bit of a shock, really, because I knew there was an anti-feeling there, but it had never been made clear to me. And I don't think any of us really knew why. They just said, no, not for us. And Goodbye Susie's too depressing. Family Man is anti-female, which is nonsense. And so it went on, So Northern, no, gay more than I realized, affecting me.
Do you think that was that there were sort of gatekeeping gay artists, perhaps because so many came through and became massive? I suppose Bowie and Elton John in that time, or although they weren't out, were they, at all?
I don't think they ever really were gay. I mean, quite honestly, I don't think Bowie was ever really gay, and I don't think Bowie was ever really gay. I think I'm not saying they used it, but certainly the androgyny and the whole androgyny of glam rock, which obviously became huge in Britain anyway, 71, 72, 73, were, bands who hadn't made it or bands who had faded suddenly decided, earrings, a bit of makeup, a bit of glitter, and we're back on top of the pops. I mean, even George Michael was getting problems, by the 90s about it.
Yeah.
Luckily, he didn't care, and he came out very quickly. And he's the only artist I can think of who being gay became an issue for his career, if you like, because apparently it was within his record company as well. But yeah, the androgyny appealed to me, certainly, Lou Reed, Berlin, and Transformer and Bowie. I just love Bowie and T-Rex. But they made great records too, so it actually didn't matter,
So tell me about your debut album, a great album it is, Kid in a Big World, released originally in 1975. What was its vision?
Well, basically, I'd gone to London in 73 with a lot of songs, because I've been writing and gigging in the North and the Northwest since I was about 17. Various places, folk clubs, universities, the Bolton Octagon Theatre. So I had amassed a load of songs, took them down to London, got seen by Stuart Reid, who became our manager, at the Troubadour in Earls Court. And he particularly loved Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which I know you like as well.
Yeah.
And he loved that song. And he used to say to me, "You're the new Noel Coward." Well, you can't get less northern than Noel Coward. There we are. He put me in Chapel Studios and we demoed several of the songs. Kid in a Big World, Family Man, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Maybe Someday in Miami, a few others. And then he touted them around record companies. CBS was the first label to actually go mad about it. They loved it. They absolutely loved these demos. Got signed up in January 74 to CBS. And then it was looking for a producer. And in those days, you had to have a name producer. You didn't just go in and produce yourself or whatever. You had to have a name producer that they could also promote alongside. Got turned down by quite a lot of producers. And eventually, Tony Meehan, who, as you know, was a drummer in the Shadows back in the 60s, and had actually worked with the Beatles in the early 60s at Decca, on the Decca demos. So he said, "We're going into Abbey Road." I booked Abbey Road, which was just like amazing, dream come true for many reasons. So we started recording in April. We had a few meetings with Tony. He listened to songs, decided on the 10 he wanted to do out of all the demos. Went into Abbey Road in April, and we worked on the album through till August in Studio 2, sometimes Studio 1 for vocal overdubs and stuff. It was great. I mean, just amazing. I lived around the corner then. I lived in St. John's Wood. So it would take me 5 minutes to walk around the corner to get to the studio, which was quite handy. For somebody who was 20 and loved Lions till 11 o'clock, that was quite handy for me, because the sessions didn't start till 2. And the sessions went really well. The only slight problem was that my manager had one vision, which was basically take songs as I demoed them and just add backing. I had a drummer, I had a guitar, had some strings. Tony Meehan had a completely different vision, which was, let's take all these songs and let's make this album as varied and impactful and different and multi-textured as we can. So he basically rewrote quite a lot of the songs to fit his own ideas. So like Gone Away, for instance, which was a closing track on side 1. I'd written it as like a Walk On By type of song, Carol King's It's Too Late type of rhythm. So sort of like an up-tempo pop ballad. And he said, no, I want this to be a really heart-wrenching, big ballad. So we're going to do it at half the speed you'd written it in. And it was really rangy, even for my voice at 20. It was a very rangy song. And Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which began, as I say, this quite Noel Coward, slightly camp, up-tempo-y like thing, very slightly flippant delivery. Again, he said, no, I want this to be really gothic. I'm going to get Rod Argent in to do all the sound effects and weird Moog synthesizer sounds. And, well, by this time, my manager was like having a nervous breakdown, going, what are you doing to his songs, As it turned out, all the changes he made, I think, were all valid.
Yeah.
Kid in a Big World, he brought in Harry Gold, who was like a 40s band leader. And instead of the piano-voiced ballad that I'd written, Tony wanted it to be this sort of slightly palm court orchestra delivery. So I sang live with the orchestra, which was great. Didn't play piano. He had his own pianist who did all the the flourishes and stuff, which in the end CBS turned down, and they said, no, go back in the studio, record it like the demo, which is what I did later at Apple Studios. So we delivered the master in August rather, 74. And they kind of silence really until we got to the conference. They invited us to the CBS conference in August, end of August, down in Torquay. And they presented the album as coming out soon and this, that, and the other. And then Paul Phillips, who was my A&R manager at CBS, so not my producer, said, I love parts of the album, but Kid in a Big World, I want to take back to how you performed it at the piano and just add some strings. So this was like Stuart's vision. Stuart was over the moon. Wow, at last. And did the same with Family Man. That was much closer to the original demo than Tony's, which was again full of lots of Moog synthesizers and swoopy noises and stuff. So we redid those at Apple in September 74, which again, Beatles fanatic dream made come true. Apple Studios, wow. And they decided on Goodbye Susie as the first single. Paul remixed it. He said there's not enough piano, there's too much bass. So he remixed it with the piano much more front in the mix. It was like a saxophone solo originally. He took that out and edited it down to 3.5 minutes because it was about 4.5. He said Radio 1 won't play it at 4.5 minutes. Well, it turned out they didn't play it at 3.5 minutes either.
Yeah.
So by February, March, it's a strange thing to say really, but by February, March, you felt as though the album kind of never existed because it hadn't sold. The 2 singles had flopped with no radio play. And I got the definite sense that CBS and my manager was panicking. This album was going to be huge. I was going to be this massive new name at CBS, introduced to the CBS sales team at the conference as our next big thing. And by February, March, it was clear that wasn't happening. So the album was like put aside and ended, until it was reissued in 2003 by RPM. It felt like it had never existed. Quite strange, after all that, to suddenly have this album dumped,
So yeah, Goodbye Susie may be the most obvious one for me to play. However, I'm going to go for one that's just insanely fun, I would say. But what's the story behind Guess Who's Coming to Dinner?
Well, that was my attempt, if you like, at Cole Porter wordplay, where you get internal rhymes. And the first line that came to me as I was at the piano, because I tend to doodle at the piano for a while and things then come to me melodically, lyrically. The girl in the Vogue magazine shades is afraid of my lady in drag. So it all sort of had these little internal rhymes. And as soon as that came to me, I was off. Where the idea for Superman and Spider-Man came from, I have no idea. They just arrived. And Flash is in there as well. And it flashed just through past my window. So that was like the beginnings of it. And I started performing it in 73 at all these different folk clubs where I was getting guest spots. Because in those days you had open mic nights and then they would maybe lead to a guest spot. So you had a whole evening to yourself, basically. So I'd perform Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, all those, and at the Octagon and at the universities. And it always went down really well.
And the Flash just flew past my window. Batman rang me today. Superman, he's my best friend. Spider-Man's coming to stay. And I'll play my accordion like all accordions should be played.
And then when my manager loved it so much, we thought, first of all, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner would be the title track. We thought it was a great title track, because of the link to the film, of course. They had that recognition factor. We had a whole photo session based on Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, where they put me in this beautiful hotel called Les Ambassadeurs in Park Lane. I had all these photographs taken at the bar and coming down these beautiful staircases and all very glamorous. But in the end, the CBS said, no, it's got to be Kid in a Big World. It's really much more evocative. So we had a whole load of new photographs done in a derelict house in Shepherd's Bush, looking quite whimsical out of windows. The Kid in a Big World, wandering.
So Kid in a Big World and also Technicolor Biography, which is another fine album, I think recorded in 1975. I think that one. They both,
74, 75, yeah.
74, 75. Yeah, they both contain certain tracks that are really full of drama, which are like mini plays for today, in conveying the collision of public and private worlds. Did you feel a kinship with British screen storytelling?
I think probably it was more to do with, I used to go and see my grandmother every Sunday when I was growing up, and she always had the TV on, this little old tiny screen, black and white, of course. Every Sunday they used to show an old film, like a 40s film, and they used to fascinate me because they're always great stories. You know, the Charles Dickens and Alfred Hitchcock movies fascinated me, Psycho. So that whole storytelling and that whole play thing definitely had an impact. But I think the storytelling side of my writing, I think that's what you're talking about. I think that was more inspired by the Beatles, really, by things like Eleanor Rigby and She's Leaving Home, Penny Lane, where, you know, McCartney especially is just brilliant, or was brilliant at putting these, like a script, into a 3 or 4 minute pop song. And I think that's probably what influenced me at the time, anyway. And then later on, of course, there was, you know, Bacharach and David, 24 Hours from Tulsa. That was another story in a song. Bobby Gentry's Ode to Billy Joe, another story about, you know, suicide, basically. Or was it suicide or not? Who knows? And then Joni Mitchell came along, and I was a big fan of Joni Mitchell, late 60s, early 70s. Her songs were always little mini Michael from Mountains, you know. She'd describe whole scenes, and that, I'm sure that had a big effect on me.
Yeah, what kinds of people came to your gigs? And did you notice any sort of change over time?
Well, I began gigging in 1970, and in those days, you found all the folk clubs, and once you found one folk club, there somebody would say, "Have you heard of this folk club?" And over time, I built up a range of places and venues I played at, and then I started doing the universities through a chap who wanted to put me on there, and he also then put me in touch with the Octagon Theatre in Bolton, which used to do something called Bluesologies every Saturday, every month, every fourth Saturday. And I was on every month for quite a while. And we had different bands and there'd be 4 or 5 different artists and bands on with me. I wasn't the headline, you know, there was like, we're all equal billing. Spyro Gyro from Martin Cochrane, I think, was a Bolton boy originally. They headlined there a couple of times and I'd play there. So I think in those days, early 70s, it would be the hippie crowd. The hippie crowd used to come to see me, you know, because I was a hippie. And that was my audience, if you like. But once I moved to London and got my record deal and started recording, the gigs stopped, really. I think the thinking was, put me in the studio, make the records, and then start promoting them once they're out. That never really transpired. And then by 76, when CBS dropped me from the label, I started playing in a lot of like restaurants and posh eateries around Knightsbridge, Fulham, Morton's in Berkeley Square, April Ashley's 88 restaurant in Knightsbridge. And that was a much posher crowd, obviously. You know, they were there to eat great food and listen to nice music. So I learned a lot of covers for that. And then when I moved into the industry in the early 80s, then all the gigging stopped. When I came back to gigging, once Kid in a Big World had been reissued in 2003-04, my gigs then were really, the audience were people who remembered Kid in a Big World and were thrilled that it had come out again and bought the CD because their LP was probably so scratched at that time. And people who just discovered me through the reviews that Kid in a Big World received. And then I started recording again, and they started buying. A bit like you discovered me through that reissue. And there, you know, the nice thing was people always came to listen. Not quite the case in the restaurants, but certainly when I started gigging again, and when I used to play the vocalists, people came to listen to every song. They didn't talk all the way through. So I suppose because my gigging was quite sporadic and spread over several decades, I didn't really see that much of a change, apart from, I suppose, some of the people who came to see me in the 70s were some of the people who came to see me again. Well, I know they were in the early 2000s, saying, you know, glad to have you back.
What was it like to work with the Indian disco pop producer Biddu and then a great northerner, Trevor Horn, in the late 70s?
Well, Biddu was a friend of my manager's. That's how I met Biddu in 73. And he'd always wanted to produce me. Particularly loved a song called Pearl Parade, which I demoed at Chapels. Later became a bonus track on the Kid in a Big World RPM CD. He always loved that. Always thought it was a hit song, always wanted to produce it. But because he didn't have a name then, in 73, my manager said no. But by 75, he was massive. You know, he'd had Tina Charles, he'd had the Biddu Orchestra, he'd had Kung Fu Fighting, Jimmy James, who was producing all these hits, all with a disco thing to it. And I think CBS thought, well, let's put him with, first of all, an artist producer who's doing well on our label, and somebody who might just put a different sound to John's, you know, maybe slightly more disco sort of sound, which felt odd, but there we are. So I wrote 2 new songs called I Got My Lady and Frightened Now, especially for Biddu to listen to. And Biddu particularly loved I Got My Lady. He said, that's a hit song. That's the first one we'll do. So we went into Nova Sound in Marble Arch, then owned by Tommy Steele, and recorded I Got My Lady and Frightened Now. They were the first 2 songs we did. CBS loved I Got My Lady, said that is a hit. We'll bring that out July 75. In the meantime, you've got the green light to do a whole album together, which is what we did. But Biddu was never an arranger. So the guy who produced those first 2 ones, his name will come back to me. I can't remember now, but he only did those 2 because he then had to move on to doing all the Biddu albums. So Biddu put us in touch with Pip Williams, who became producer of Status Quo later. And he was much more involved, if you like, in the arrangements. He came into my manager's office every day, and I'd play him a new song, and he'd take it away on a demo. He put on a little one of those little what they call dictaphones to bring it with him, and go away to write the arrangements until we had 10 songs. So Biddu was basically the guy in the control room, and Pip was the guy who arranged them and was more involved, if you like, in the personal side. He'd come into the studio and talk to me before we recorded with the orchestra and the band, because Biddu was more like a sound guy, you know. Biddu loved the sound of records. I never saw Biddu as a vocalist producer, whereas Pip was really into voices, and he loved my voice. So together, it was like a team, you know. The 2 of them would discuss what we'd done, and then so it felt like I was working with a producer and an arranger all rolled into one production thing.
Yeah.
But Biddu was a great guy. I've been in touch with him a few times over the years, and he's a lovely guy, Biddu. He was lovely to work with. But my memories are more about Pip, really, because I think of that personal connection with the songs and the arrangements and his pure love for what I was doing, which is always inspirational. Trevor was somebody who my manager knew through Tina Charles, because my manager, he handled all Tina's, through the Biddu connection, tours and concerts, and he'd handle all the fan mail. How that happened, I have no idea, but sackfuls of Tina Charles fan mail used to turn up every week. And he knew Trevor because Trevor was then living with Tina. And Trevor was in Tina's band. He played bass in Tina's band. But I think a conversation Trevor must have had with Stuart was that he wanted to be a producer. That was his dream, to produce hit records. And so he said, well, I've got an artist, John Howard. You won't have heard of him. He's without a record deal now. This was 77, early 77. He hasn't got a record deal, but if you like what he does. So he played him 2 or 3 of my previous recordings. He loved Frightened Now. I remember him loving Frightened Now. And he said, yeah, I'd love to work with him. Love his voice, love what he does, but I want to take him away from the singer-songwriter thing. And I want to put him in the studio with my band and give him a whole new sound. So the first thing I wrote to work with him as a record was I Can Breathe Again, which I originally wrote for Tina. So I sang the demo in a falsetto voice thinking, that was more her range. And I gave it to Trevor and said, will you play this to Tina for a possible single? And he listened to it in the car with me. He said, no. He said, you're doing this. This is the first track we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fascinating. I'd never worked in a studio without playing the piano before. I'd never just stood at a microphone and never had anything to do with the backing. And so we had Jeff Downes and Anne Dudley on keyboards, Bruce Woolley on guitar, Louis Jardim, who died recently, on bass, Linda Jardim, his wife, who became the female vocalist on Video Kill the Radio Star a couple of years later.
Mm.
So they were my backing band. The drummer, I can't remember the name of now. And they produced this fantastic disco thing, which was very Bee Gees-ish. You know, it had that Bee Gees sound to it, real groove. And my manager wasn't sure about it, but Trevor said he has to sing falsetto. That's the sound of this record. It has to have that Barry Gibb falsetto thing. And it worked. You know, I loved doing it. It was great fun. And I found it very easy. I wasn't expecting to find it so easy to go into that upper falsetto range. Stuart played it to a guy called Robin Blanchflower at Areola, and he loved it and put it out in early 78. Trevor and I went in again to do a follow-up called Don't Shine Your Light. And by then, he was starting to get a little bit more recognized as a producer, so he put a lot more time and a bit more money into it. I think Don't Shine Your Light is a bigger production than I Can Breathe Again. But they stand side by side as that Bee Gees-esque disco thing. And that came out in late 79 for some reason. But yeah, and we remained friends. I see Trevor from time to time. He and I kept in touch. He actually came to the funeral of my manager, Stuart, in 2003. And we've kept in touch on and off since then. Great guy. I mean, great fun, very creative, a real vision. We used to call him Trevor OTT Horn because whatever management or an artist asked him to do, he'd always add another 100% onto it, you know.
Yeah.
Which it became his signature, you know, with Frankie and Grace Jones and everybody else he's produced. They always have that huge
maximalist sort of, yeah.
Totally, absolutely, absolutely. Which we couldn't afford when I was working with him, but.
So, like, why do you think it wasn't a hit? I Can Breathe Again. Because it is an excellent disco track, I would say.
It is, and it was the first record of mine that got played by Radio 1. Radio 1 had ignored me beforehand, but Dave Lee Travis played it, I remember, and apparently got such a great reaction, he played it again. And then they put it on one of these Radio 1 panels where they play the 4 latest releases that week that they'd chosen, and a panel of 4 or 5 members of the public would vote for them. And I Can Breathe Again came second, just behind Donna Summer and just ahead of Diana Ross. So I was squeezed between 2 disco queens. And then it got even more plays. And we Areola, we all thought, this is going to do it, you know. And then it just nothing happened. There was no follow through. The players stopped. And so those are mysteries in my career that I'll never quite understand, you know, the way that everything used to begin in a big way and then fade, you know. And so luckily I'm quite resilient, so I just move on to something else. But yes, it should have been it. It really should. And it's probably one of my most streamed tracks on Spotify now and on YouTube.
Yeah. So what are your deepest memories of writing and recording The Dangerous Hours from 2005? It may well be my favourite album of yours, I think, that one.
Yeah, it is a lot of people's. Well, I was doing a concert at the Jermyn Street Theatre in April 2004 to promote the reissue of Kid in a Big World. And one of the guys who'd been invited by RPM to be there, it was like an invitation-only sort of gig, was Robert Cochrane. And I didn't know him, but he told Mark Stratford at RPM how much of a fan he was of Kid in a Big World, and he was so pleased it was coming out again. He bought the LP in the early 80s because he missed it first time round. He's about 10 years younger than me, so he'd missed the original release, but had loved it ever since the 80s. And after the gig, we got talking, and he said, I'll send you some of my poetry books, because he had some poems published. And he sent these books to me, and I love them. It's such a great writer. Great way with words. And, you know, he's an Irish poet. He lives in Manchester now, but he's an Irish poet. So I think that Irish lilt, if you like, comes into his writing as well, that great sort of way with words. And so I suggested to him we should write a song together using his words and my music. So he sent me a poem he'd written to Jobriath, who was a mid-70s American glam artist who never made it, but he was a bit late for glam by 75. That's probably the reason why he never cut through. If he'd been 3 years earlier, he might have done something. But great songwriter, a great pianist. Jobriath was a brilliant pianist, but never cut through. But so the song is kind of about his failure to make it, which kind of resonated with me a little bit. And I wrote this song called Stardust Falling for Jobriath in brackets. And I recorded it on an album called Same Bed, Different Dreams, which I'd started recording before The Dangerous Hours, but hadn't finished it. And Rob was so thrilled with Stardust Falling. We both said, well, let's push it a stage further. Why don't we write a whole album together? Let's see what happens. So within days, 4 exercise books of poems arrived through the post. Just all these poems. I don't know if he'd written them all then, but they were all there. He said, just pick whatever you want. Let's do 14. Pick whichever ones you like the best, and let's see what happens. So that's what I did. So I picked the ones I like the best, worked on it for several weeks. What I remember is feeling a great affinity with his writing. Although they weren't my lyrics, they felt kind of like my words, because he seemed to be able to phrase things in ways that I probably would have done. And also because I'd never done that before, putting somebody else's words to music, I think it made me write slightly differently. And the other thing about working with Rob, which I've done again recently with my new album, is that he's not precious. So he sends you a poem, but if you want to make a verse a chorus and a chorus a verse, if you want to cut some lines out and replace them with some of your own that you think would fit melodically, put in a middle 8 if you wanted to, he was fine. He calls it shaping and shifting. So he's, that made it much easier than having to stick to the poem. There was one we did which I opened the album, and that was based on 4 or 5 short poems he'd done, which I put together as a song, and then added a tune to it all. And the last one we did together was Dear Glitter Heart, which is the last thing he sent me that individually. He said, I've just written this poem. We've got to do it. And that became probably the biggest track on the album, Dear Glitter Heart, I think. And it's the one I always gig, I always perform in concert. It seems to resonate with people. So Rob decided to put it out himself. He had his own record label called Bad Pressings. And so he said, I want to put this out and I'll just get a distribution company to distribute it for us. And so we got Cargo Distribution handled it. He sent it out to 2 or 3 reviewers, and we ended up with these 5-star reviews in The Guardian and Uncut and Mojo, and it was just astonishing, these reviews that sort of appeared. Best reviews I've ever had. Kid in a Big World, when it was reissued, that got great reviews too. But for a new album to have this response was fantastic. It didn't sell particularly well, but I think even by 2005, physical sales were starting to drop a little. And then gradually the streaming thing sort of took that over, if you like. But certainly in terms of reviewer and reactions and people who bought it, was fantastic. Really fantastic. So I have very fond memories of that album, really fond memories.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who bought it would have played it a lot, like myself. Yeah.
Good. Excellent.
Many times. Yeah.
What would your favourite track be on there?
It's difficult to pick them, but certainly that trio of Early Closing Days, Dangerous Hours title track, and Dear Glitter Heart are all up there. I'm definitely going to play one of those.
Oh, brilliant.
Story ends the way that stories end. Where do we go from here? Where is the grace, the promise of peace in a beautiful face? There for the taking as a light hides the stars. The night is minding the dangerous hours.
Fabulous.
And what's the the place that's on the cover. It's a very, very good image. Is that Pembrokeshire?
No, it's a 1930s photo that Rob found. He finds these incredible things. He's always delving, Rob, into history, historic places, people from the past, which again, I know we'll probably talk about this later, but the new album, for those that want to buy, which are his poems are set to music again. First time we've done it since Dangerous Hours. He got very fascinated by 2 or 3 historic figures and put those into, again, story songs. So yeah, the cover is I think it's 1930s, 40s image he found, probably in a shop somewhere. He goes to the Hay on Wye book thing every year, being a writer himself. He may have found it in a book there or a copper plate or something. His house is full of these things all over the place, full of memorabilia. It's great.
Yeah. So did Safety in Numbers, which I think appeared on a 2010s album as well as Single Return in 2024. Did that draw upon your personal experiences? That's a really beautiful, melancholy song.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yes, it's one of my favourites on there too. Well, basically, yes, you're right. Originally, it was written with Robert Rotifer, who wrote the music and I wrote the words. That's right. For that project that we were working on together with Andy Lewis and Ian Button, called John Howard and the Night Mail.
Yeah.
I'll say it again, John Howard and the Night Mail, because whenever I say it, it sounds like nightmare. Everybody goes, weird name for a band, John Howard and the Night Mail. So we recorded that in 2014. It came out in 2015 on Tapeta Records, which is a German label based in Hamburg. And that got probably the best reviews I've ever had, ever. It got over 25 five-star reviews. Metacritic, who I'd never heard of before, but they put it into their top 15 best reviewed albums of 2015. All Music Guide made it their best singer-songwriter album of the year. Astonishing, really, And so it was like one of those, wow, something's happening here. We gigged it. We did some concerts. We did a show in London. We did a show in Vienna. We did a few in Germany, 2016. But what I did for that album, I did some preparatory recordings of just piano and voice to send to the guys, just to let them hear my ideas for these songs we'd written together. Because they'd send me words, I'd send them words, I'd put some of those to music, and they'd do the same with mine. So it was like this joint thing going on. And Safety in Numbers was one of those songs I sent to Robert, because I just thought it would resonate with him. And I think it really the lyric came originally from my experiences in the 80s when AIDS was killing many of my friends. And I used to get shouted at in the street in the 80s, AIDS victim and stuff like that. And I think it was that feeling of, the gay community has to come together to stand strong. Safety in numbers. Let's not all be individualized as vermin. Because by the time when AIDS came along, one really felt that being gay had been fully accepted at last. I remember there were articles in The Guardian about the Pink Pound. And, we were seen as a positive, artistic group of people, in the theatre and in music and in film and in theatre. So there was a definite feeling by the 80s that, wow, nobody seems to mind anymore. But certainly when AIDS came along, I started losing friends, and so did my husband. There was a feeling of, here we go again. We're back to being diseased, disgusting creatures, literally. I mean, it sounds bizarre to say that now, but it's how one felt. Not within yourself, but just the way that... And the newspapers didn't help, of course. The tabloids, they were just like... So that's where the idea came from of the lyric. And I sent it to Robert, and I remember saying to Robert, this may be a little strong. You may find this a difficult song, not being gay himself. You may find this a difficult one to write music for. And he just said, no, I just love these lyrics, and I love what you're saying. And I think it resonates even more now with, with what's going on in America, the whole LGBTQ plus, Trump's sort of antagonism towards them, and the legal gender challenges people are going through in the UK now, transitioning and stuff, is looked down upon now. And certainly when I recorded Look in 2022, which was based on my friend April Ashley, that still wasn't kind of happening. There was still a feeling of positivity about people transitioning. That's changed. So I think safety in numbers is quite relevant now. And when I put Single Return out in 24, which was the piano and vocal recordings I did as preparation for the Nightmare album, which I wasn't going to release, but Robert said, put this out. These are great masters, put them out. So I did in 2014, and I had a fantastic reaction to the whole album. But that one in particular seemed to cut through to people. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that one up.
Stuff all the homophobes, bigots and yobs. Stuff 'em with our love, watch 'em all gob. The poison can't touch us anymore. Safety in numbers, cast the first stone. Listen to Buddha crying below. Believe all the headlines where conspiracy thrives.
And you covered East Kilbride's Roddy Frame's Small World on the same album. Why did you select it? And have you seen the sitcom Early Doors, which used it as its title music?
Yes, I didn't know that until it came out in 2015, and people said, "Have you seen Early Doors?" And I hadn't. So I knew Roddy's music through Aztec Camera. I knew his music through then, but I didn't know his solo stuff at all. And it was Robert Rotifer again. We'd written 10 songs together, and Robert said we really should pick a song, a cover that we all love. And we all had our own ideas, but he sent us all Small World, Roddy's recording of Small World. Loved it immediately. It's a beautiful song. And I felt a real affinity with it vocally as well. I found it very lovely to sing and lovely to play. And in fact, when we'd recorded it and the album came out, the Nightmare album, Roddy sent a lovely note to Robert thanking him for us recording his song, which was fantastic.
Yeah.
But it's a beautiful song. And again, it's one that I always like doing live. And the Single Return recording, again, has become one of my streamed and most viewed on YouTube as well.
Yeah.
So it's obviously a really well-loved song by a lot of people.
And your newest album is For Those That Wander By, which I have listened to now. I think it's really good stuff.
Thank you. Thank you.
So what is the sort of vision of that album, would you say?
Well, the vision, as it did with The Dangerous Hours, really, it came from Rob, really. Rob sent me the poems. So they dictated, if you like, the music. So the opening song, Losing Myself in Others, about the World War I poet, Roddy Ward, unknown, but again, Robert Cochrane discovered him. The whole album concept came about initially because we both said, isn't it time we wrote another album together? So, and it'll be 20 years in 2025 since Dangerous Hours, so that made sense. So Losing Myself in Others was about Roddy. Roddy was a poet who wasn't recognized at the time, but his father was a really well-known sculptor, sculpted for royalty. His godfather was tried for treason in 2016 and hung, and his brother was killed in the First World War. So he had all these tragedies, Roddy, and eventually got the better of him. He committed suicide in 2022, at the age of 21, I think. So Rob had written a poem about him. He wrote one about Louisa Casati, which on the album is called Casati's Tears. And she was a very Gothic character. She was from the 20s, 30s, 40s period. Italian lady who married a marquis, so she became La Marquesa. And she was basically a walking piece of art. She used to create these incredible outfits. And she became one of these people that got invited to parties, house parties, where she'd appear in these incredible. She used to have a leopard on a lead. She used to wear snakes as bracelets on her arms. I mean, just an amazing person. She used to have her own parties at her palazzo in Venice. And again, it made an amazing poem, the story of Luisa Casati. And for a songwriter, it was just, it was fantastic to be presented with this poem. And I think the track itself is quite gothic, and I wanted it to be really big and over the top and dramatic. And also then the Man Who Was America, which is on about Paul America, who was an American actor, one of Andy Warhol's stable of actors. He appeared in a couple of Andy Warhol films and did a couple of other films. Again, had a very short, tragic life. And I thought, well, when I got the poem, when I looked at it, I thought this could be another ballad. But I decided instead to do something I do sometimes, where I take a ballad or a sad lyric and make it into a up-tempo pop song almost. I've done it quite a few times. So when I recorded it and sent it to Rob, I thought, I'm not sure how he's going to respond to this. And he said, well, I thought this was going to be a really big, tragic ballad. He said, but what you've done is wonderful. I love it, love it, love it. Sounds like something Bowie might have done. So the vision really, as I say, came from Rob. The musical vision came from me. So again, together, I think we've come up with a really good album. Think Like a Key Music, a label based in America. They picked up on it. They put it out in February. And they've been fantastic. They've done videos for it, beautiful videos, and promoted it really, really well. There's another video coming through soon of Casati's Tears, which Roger Houdet at
watch that.
I think yeah, that's coming out soon. But the Losing Myself in Others video, it's just astonishing. I definitely give that a watch. It's
I will do.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And what's next? Is another album in the works?
Yeah, there is. As is my want, lots of songs were coming through while I was recording for those that wonder why. So this next one will be my words and music. I've been writing it for quite a few months now, recording it. It's coming out sometime next year. I hopefully Think Like a Key Music will put that out as well. Also, something which is quite strange has happened recently, which I don't know if you've noticed on Facebook, but a track I recorded in 1980 called I Tune Into You, which was my first single out on CBS when I went back to them, which is an electro pop extravaganza.
Yeah.
Which came about through my producer then, Nicky Graham, who loved all that. And I took a lot of demos to him, and he said, these are great for synth, Prophet 5 and drum machines. Again, I'd never done that before. So we did several tracks for an album, which didn't get released, but they put 2 singles out. Well, as far as I was saying, that had gone. It's 45 years ago, and move on. And then very recently, an old friend of mine, Phil King, who was in Lush, Earl Brutus, Jesus and Mary Chain, played bass on a couple of my albums and gigged with me in the 2005-6 period. He got in touch with me last year and said, I'm compiling an album called All the Young Droids of all the electro synth stuff that weren't hits, that should have been hits, but they weren't. And I want to put I Tune Into You on that. That came out last week on Night School Records, a Glasgow-based label. Because of that, I Tune Into You is suddenly swept from nowhere to the top of my Spotify chart, swept from nowhere onto YouTube. There are now something like 7 or 8 videos of I Tune Into You on YouTube, getting all these views. And I'm being mentioned in all the reviews as well for All the Young Droids. The reviews always make me laugh because they always say, in 75 he recorded an album called Kid in a Big Well, but then he did this electro pop synth thing, forget that. This is what we're interested in, like that never happened type of thing, or just about happened. So I find that fascinating, the way a compilation that gets a lot of profile. They even had an event for it what day is it today? On Monday in London, where all these synth pop fans, plus apparently lots of young people, came to, and they did a big screen thing and a big presentation. And the album sold out. It only came out last week and it's sold out, so they're now repressing it. But it just shows the power of back catalogue. And I've noticed this several times, where a track or something you've done which you've completely forgotten about suddenly gets put onto an album, and suddenly everybody's going, wow. Well, it happened with Kid in the Big World, of course. Goodbye, Susie. Nobody, apart from those who were around at the time, really knew about it. But when Kid in the Big World was reissued, Goodbye, Susie was like you just said, about I Can Breathe Again. Why wasn't this a hit? This is crazy, and that's become my most popular track of all time. Lost classic, and it was called in reviews. And I thought, I seem to remember this being far too depressing for Radio 1 to play.
On the beach walks a girl in blue into the misty sea spray. Ah, goodbye, Susie. This town will soon forget you. Goodbye, Susie. This town will soon forget you. Goodbye, Susie. This town.
So yeah, that catalogue does have its benefits and its moments.
What does being Northern mean to you?
Well, I think I said to you earlier, I've never really thought of myself as a Northerner per se. Yes, I come from the North, of course, but I only lived there for 20 years, and I always dreamed of going to London. A, to make it, and B, London always fascinated me. I think probably being gay too had a lot to do with it. I never felt accepted as a gay person in the North. I used to get a lot of name calling, used to get bullied at school like crazy. So when I got to London, I suddenly thought, oh, anonymity, fabulous, love it. Nobody knows who I am. You can just live this life in this huge city, and multicultural, multigender, multisexual. It just felt great. So I suppose being Northerner itself, it doesn't really mean a lot to me, except that, that's where I came from. That's where I grew up. And there are lots of good memories and lots of not so good memories, which are personal to me. I don't mean that in any critical way.
What do you see as the main attributes of Northern people and places?
Well, I think there are good people everywhere, and there are beautiful places in the North. I mean, there are some lovely places I'm in Hayward, where I was born and brought up until the age of 7. It's a lovely little town. It really is. It's beautifully kept, great park with a lake and a bandstand. I remember going there with my aunties and my grandparents, listening to the brass bands every Sunday. And I suppose there is always this thing of Northern people are the friendliest. I've never really found that. There are friendly people everywhere, and there are unfriendly people everywhere.
Yeah.
So those main attributes, I don't know. I suppose there is a down-to-earthness, and I think also because maybe, certainly back in those days, people from the North didn't feel that they were given the same recognition as people from the South, perhaps. They were always looked upon maybe as slightly poorer, back-to-back houses and all that sort of stuff. So maybe that's given them a bit of grit, which may have influenced me somewhat, because I think I've always had that. I think that's how I've stayed sane and alive, really, through all these many decades, So I think that's probably the one I would pick out, the grit, that inner grit, that survival instinct, I mean, my grandmother's, well, both my grandmother's family were working class, very poor. My grandmother's brothers worked down the mines. My grandmother's sisters worked in the mills. My mother's aunties and mother worked in the cotton mills, which is why they left. They lived in Ireland and moved to Wigan, and then moved to Hayward, where there's a big cotton mill thing going on there. I remember my Auntie Chrissy saying to me, which was my maternal grandmother's sister, saying to me when I was a child, you're very lucky. All these presents you get at Christmas, we got one orange. That was it. So I suppose that also, contributes to that feeling of survival.
Yeah. What is the number one myth about the North or Northern people that you think needs consigning to history?
Well, I think it is that sort of everybody up north is dead friendly. Some of them are, but they were in Oxford, they were in Wales, so they were in London. I had a lot of friends in London. So I think that's probably the myth I would question because it's a generalization, and myths are usually based on generalizations, aren't they? You know?
Do you think the North-South divide in Britain exists?
Less now, I would say, than it did back then. I think the Beatles had a lot to do with the whole Merseybeat thing, had a lot to do with breaking down that North-South divide. And it was quite interesting how quickly the Beatles, particularly, although they always were Liverpudlian, once they made it, they were sort of just British, you know. Britain embraced them, and then America embraced them, and then the world embraced them. So I think that North-South divide was smashed somewhat by the mid-60s. And, you know, a lot of great bands came out of the North in the 60s, right into the 80s, you know, a lot of great Northern bands, which again, you know, the North-South divide ceased to exist, really. I know there was that whole George Osborne thing in 2010-ish time, you know, the Great Northern Powerhouse or whatever he called it, which I don't think he did much about, but there we are. Yeah, so I can't really comment personally because I don't live there anymore. But whenever I talk to the family I have left, which isn't much in the North, I never get that feeling of, oh, you know, everybody in the South thinks we're dead common. I never get that because everybody goes on holiday, everybody travels, you know. There are a lot of people from the North here in southern Spain, a lot of people from the North of England buy holiday homes here. They can now, you know. In the 50s and 60s, that would never have been imagined. So, yeah, I think it's probably gone, personally, I would have said.
And what is your favourite place in the North and why?
It would be Hayward, where I was brought up as a child. I have really good memories of Hayward. And all my family lived streets away, you know. So I was surrounded by my family. We'd all get together, say, at the park, have picnics. I'd literally walk around the corner. I'd be at my nan's, walk down the street. I'd be at my grand's, aunties, etc., cousins. So there was a great familial joy, if you like. And I had a great childhood, very happy childhood. Lived on a council estate, brand new in the 50s when my parents moved in. And that always had a really good atmosphere. So, yeah, I would say, and I think the last time I went was in the 90s, and it still looked really nice, still looked really clean. So they've kept it up. Good for you, Hayward. Well done.
And what's your least favourite place in the North and why?
That would be very rude, wouldn't it, to say anything, really? And I've lived in Hayward, Bury, and Ramsay's Bottom. They're the three places I kind of know. Everywhere else I gigged in, but I was there for a night. So I can't really comment in terms of what I think now. I think if you'd have asked me that when I was 7 years old, when my mother decided she was fed up of living in a council house, she wanted to own her own house. So they bought a brand new house in Bury, and I was moved from a gorgeous junior school in Hayward, brand new, all the mod cons. It was just a fantastic place. Loved it. I was only there 3 months, and then in December 1960, we moved to Bury. So I was moved into a different school in Bury, which was a dilapidated, derelict Victorian building. Bits of the ceiling literally falling down while you were at lesson. Why nobody was ever killed, I have no idea. It was knocked down in the 70s and a new one was built because I went to see it for a college project, actually. And that was very nice. But so my memory of that period isn't a good memory. I was, for whatever reason, because it was like 10 miles away, I was considered posh in Bury. All the other people in the school, I was a newbie 3 months later after they had all settled in. So that's always difficult for a child.
Yeah.
And I was posh. I was probably Campus Christmas, even in those days, screamed a lot. I remember screaming a lot in the play, which didn't go down well at all. And Bury, I think, in those days, again, I can't speak for now, but in those days, I think Bury was quite a poor town. I don't think it had that cotton mill industry that had kept it wealthy background to it. It felt quite run down then, along with the school. And I was bullied throughout my whole period at that school, relentlessly bullied, verbally, physically. I was gobsmacked because I'd never had that before. And that went right through into my secondary modern days, moved to an even rougher school when I was 11. But by the time I was 13, it was discovered I played the piano. So I was asked to perform at a Christmas party, and I sang Beatles songs and played the piano, went down a storm, and overnight, the bullying stopped, the name calling stopped, and I was admired for being a different person to them. Before that had been a negative, suddenly being different, talented. He can sing, he plays piano great, this guy, became a real positive. So my memories of being there from the age of 13 changed. And by the time, into my teens, and then I went to art college in Accrington, which was a very, very, very happy time. I loved being at art college. A lot of great people. So it's, I can tell you about my memories at a junior and secondary modern school in Bury, but couldn't say that I would make Bury my least favourite place in the north because I don't really know enough. And now I'm sure it's changed radically. I'm sure it has. Must have done.
What is your favourite northern institution or organisation or public space?
There'd be two, really. One of them would be the library in Bury. Beautiful old red brick Victorian building. Always smelled of polish. The floors were shining, wood floors. Shelves were always gleaming, full of books. My mother was a big book reader. She'd go in the library 2-3 times a week and get books out. And she used to always take me with her, which is how I got into reading in a big way. I became a big book reader. Certainly in my teens, I read and read and read. So she had a lot to do with that. So that building, beautiful, beautiful building. I think it's still there. I'm not sure it's a library anymore. But that would be somewhere I'd always cherish. And the other would be the Octagon Theatre in Bolton, where I told you I did these bluesology gigs, which were always great fun, packed to the rafters with people. And I built up a big following there. People would actually come to the bluesologies because I was on. And that's when I realized, I can do this as well. I can actually grow a following by just playing. So I think that sort of clicked on me. That I think that's where I learnt my stagecraft, probably, where I used to talk forever, believe it or not, and and sing. And I also got that off Roy Harper because I saw him at the Free Trade Hall in Manchester. That's another great building. I think that's now Abbey National or Santander Bank, I think, or I'm not sure what it is now. But that was a great place, the Free Trade Hall. And I saw Roy Harper there twice. And he used to come on with just his guitar, talk forever, play a song, stop playing halfway through, talk some more, carry on where he left off. I thought he was an absolute genius, Roy Harper. I loved it. I still do. Stormcock. If you've never heard Stormcock.
I've heard it, yeah. It's great. Yeah.
It's astonishing album. 71. Recorded at Abbey Road. Brilliant album. So, yeah. So there we are.
What do you remember of the atmosphere of the Octagon?
Fantastic, because it was a theatre. It put on plays, which I used to go and see, these Chekhov plays and Brendan Behan and people like that. I used to go with the college to see these plays. So playing there was always fascinating because the bluesologies were Saturday afternoons, they didn't move the sets. So you would be playing in the middle of the set for Chekhov's The Orchard or, some other play. So you had to sort of work your way around the sets, basically, and the piano would be plunked in the middle and the bands would sort of play in the middle, surrounded by these amazing drawing rooms and French windows and stuff. So you had this great theatrical atmosphere, which suited me down to the ground. I mean, I thought it was fantastic. And the audience was so receptive. They were probably some of the best audiences I played to in terms of a big theatre, where people were there because they wanted to be there. They didn't necessarily know many of the acts who were on. They came because they wanted to see talented artists playing. And the Sparajara gigs, I always supported Sparajara in those days. And they were electric. They were just an incredible band to be involved with and watch. Lovely guys too. I think that my memory of the Octagon is basically the atmosphere. And they had a great sound system too.
And what's your favourite northern book, graphic novel, photograph, or artwork? You just have to pick one of those rather than 4 in total. That would be a bit much.
No, not at all. I'd probably pick 2. Artwork, stroke artist would be David Hockney. I've always loved David Hockney's work. He influenced my feel for colour when I was at art college, and I still paint now, and I still use those sort of primary colours that he's great at. So he inspired definitely my view of art, and I still love what he does. And in fact, I dedicated a song to David Hockney called Portrait of a Mother, because I went to one of his exhibitions in January 2007 in London, and one whole room of this massive exhibition was all the paintings of his mother in different periods. And I couldn't stop staring at them, you just couldn't stare at them too long because there was this huge queue, so you had to keep moving. But they really affected me so much so that I went home and wrote this song about painting a portrait of your mother. Yeah. So that's how inspiring I find him. A writer, I would say Alan Bennett, because he's so witty and he is very northern in the way he writes. Some of his phrases are very much like the sort of things my grandmother would have said, sit down and make yourself less. And who's been licking the library steps then when you get a bit too clever for yourself, a watch pot never boils. My mother was always saying that. It's not true, but it's a great saying. So I think that aspect of Bennett's writing obviously resonated with me, with my family background. And he's a great guy. He's a person. As a person, he's very funny, very witty. I saw him in a Stonewall production at the Royal Albert Hall in about the 90s sometime. And he was one of the people who came on. Well, Les was just laughing his head off. He just didn't stop. And I think he did one of his sketches that he did on Beyond the Fringe. He did one of those as well, which was very, very funny. So yeah, those probably out of all that, those would be my two northern artists, if you like, writers, artists.
And what's your favourite film or TV programme of any kind, set or shot in Northern England? Why?
I think that would be based on memories, really, in terms of Coronation Street, which when it came out in 1960, it was quite revolutionary. It was like this episodic kitchen sink drama featuring real northern people living in terraced back-to-back houses. And I think that was quite revolutionary for TV at the time.
Yeah.
And I read somewhere that it wasn't that popular in the north. It was much more popular in the south because they were fascinated by the accents and this way of living. And again, that old-fashioned phraseology, which Victoria Wood was also great at picking out, the Julie Walters thing and the Patricia Routledge, that they had this great northern way about them. And people like Elsie Tanner and Ina Sharples, just classic characters.
Yeah.
And written by gay men. So there was also a lot of camp in there too. I wasn't aware of it at the age of 7, but whenever I've seen it in later years, you think, God, this is very camp.
Yeah.
So that would be probably a TV program. Another that I was very impressed with was in the 90s, Our Friends in the North. Daniel Craig, Christopher Eccleston, Giles McKay, Gina McKay, rather. I think that, for me, captured how the North felt in the 60s really well. So they would be the two. Film-wise, I can't really think. I think there was one called Saturday Night, Sunday Morning. I thought was based in the North.
Not Nottinghamshire. That probably isn't it. Although some people include Nottinghamshire in the North, some don't.
Some don't. Yeah.
East Midlands.
Well, I remember. Yeah, East Midlands. I remember seeing that, and again, revolutionary at the time. So yeah, I think they'd be the ones that stand out for me still. There's probably loads I've missed out, but there we are.
And could you please nominate one unfairly overlooked northern person to be on this podcast's Northerner roster?
Well, the first person who comes to mind is an artist called Alex Heighton. Have you heard of Alex Heighton?
I haven't, no.
Okay. A singer-songwriter from Liverpool, now lives in Cambridge. Such a talented singer-songwriter. His first album, Wood Ditton's Wives Club, which is where he lives now, Wood Ditton, or thereabouts. Don't want to give out his address. That's a great album. Wood Ditton's Wives Club, Alex Heighton. Definitely worth looking out.
Yeah.
He's really talented. I covered one of his songs, Song for Someone, in 2014. I actually played piano on a track on his album, Nobody Knows Anything. And I also gigged with him in 2014. I played piano at a gig of his at the Servant Jazz Quarters in North London. Lovely guy, really talented. And for whatever reason, in 2018, he retired. He's still quite a young guy, He just gave up. He released 3 albums, and then that was kind of it. And he seems to be very happy. He's got a wife, 2 kids, and seems a really happy chappy and doesn't seem to miss it. I know Robert Rotifer was really keen to get him back on the gig circuit, but he's just not. And he was great live, and he was very funny, that Liverpudlian humour thing. So I was going to nominate anybody, it would be Alex. He's certainly somebody I think, he might not welcome it anymore, but certainly he's somebody I think should have had a much higher profile and a lot more success than he actually had.
Well, I'll definitely check out his music now after this.
Great.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And could you please tell me your selections of 3 songs or pieces of music which deeply express the North to you?
Straight away, Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields Forever. First of all, because they were both great mini plays that John had written and Paul had written of their childhoods and their memories of Liverpool. Plus, they're fantastic. I think they're probably the 2 best recordings ever made, ever. I still believe that. I mean, by then, 67, I was still living up north. I was 14 when they came out. And I think they resonated with me because I could dissociate myself with the images, certainly in Penny Lane, and they still do. I mean, they're just brilliant records and brilliant songs.
Well, that was really social. And then Strawberry Fields Forever is sort of inner space, isn't it, of John Lennon's head?
Yeah, that's right.
Really great contrast.
Yeah, that's why they work so well together, John and Paul, because Paul was very interested in literally writing these mini plays that later on, more increasingly more, where John, as you say, wrote very much in the first person, very much, as you say, from his head. And he never seemed to admire that aspect of Paul's writing. He always used to apparently say to Paul, write from yourself, from you, But I think Paul is much more of an observer, and John is much more of, I'm in pain and I'm going to tell you all about it now in another song, which worked. And together, the songwriters together, that they unequaled, really.
Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to Strawberry Fields. Nothing is real, and nothing to get hung about. Strawberry Fields forever. Guys, I sit and think while Penny Lane is in my ears and in my eyes. There beneath the blue suburban skies, Penny Lane.
I seem to remember there was a record by Dream Academy in the 80s called Life in a Northern Town.
Yeah, so it's a great record.
Oh, beautiful record. The production.
Through an open window came, like Sinatra in a younger day, pushing the town away. Hey, mama, hey, mama, hey, life in a northern town.
And the video as well, featuring lots of scenes from the north. That's also brilliant. So I think probably those are the 3 I would think of.
Great choices.
Thank you.
Thanks for talking, John. That's been a
My
pleasure.
pleasure, Tom. All right, Tom. You take care.
The same for you. Yeah, all the best.
All right.
Yeah.
And let me know what you think about Alex Hyton.
Yeah, we'll do. Yeah. Cheers.
Okay. Great talking.
Great talking.
That's it for this week on Hit the North. Conversations, editing, idents and stings by Tom May. Thanks to my guest John Howard for talking on 16th of July 2025. Music came from, well, John Howard, many eras of his work, alongside the Beatles and the Dream Academy. Hang on! Want to be on the podcast or suggest a guest? Email hitthenorthne41 @proton.me. Send us your favourite northern songs, places or stories there, or in the Hit the North Facebook group, and you'll get shout-outs. If you've enjoyed this, spread the word on social media or in person, and follow at Hit the North UK at bsky.social. Don't miss the Hit the North playlist on Spotify.
hit the north, mile